Hey, welcome back, and we have a Lou Horton. Isn't that just a thing of beauty? Lou Horton, yes, Lou Horton stuff. If you're not familiar with Lou Horton stuff, shame on you, because you are missing out on some really beautiful custom stuff. Lou Horton definitely knocked him out of the park with some of his ordered guns, special ordered stuff, and this one's definitely no slouch. Smith and Wesson. You ever seen a Model 29 blued with a short barrel, round butt, with those kind of grips? Isn't that a thing of beauty? I remember when I first laid eyes on one of these, it was in a magazine or something. I saw a photograph of it. Never in a million years I think we'd be sitting here with one in our hands for the channel and doing that. So, but yes, Lou Horton, unfortunately no longer around in business, but they did special order some amazing stuff. So anyway, we're going to tear into this thing and look at some stuff and kind of go over a little things that I run through when cleaning and things like that. Not necessarily a fully disassembly video, but hang out and we'll get to some of the goods inside of here. Before we start, one thing I was a little pet peeve of mine. One time I was watching a video on how to disassemble something and some years back, and it was like, oh, by the way, you need this tool to do this. I'm like, well, great, I'm halfway through it and now you tell me. So if you're going to tear into Smith revolvers firsthand, this tool right here is going to make your life a whole lot easier, and we'll get to that right away when we see this. But just a heads up, if you don't start unless you kind of really have this, because yeah, you can probably get away with doing it without it, but I would say I wouldn't try to do it, because there's some things that you need to know about the way it works and the pins and stuff that are studded to the frame. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is make sure you have the correct bits. Screwdriver bits, correct bits are very important. Do not just start grabbing some screwdriver bits and stuff that is out of your regular old carpentry thing, because you will find that they're not designed for it. They have like a wedge like this, and gunsmithing bits are straight up and down, and they fit into the screw heads better and all the way to the bottom. So making sure you have the right bits, and making sure that when they go into the screw, they go all the way down to the bottom like that. And they're not halfway up, and we're going to overturn it and pretty much take the top of the screw head right off. So we're going to take the grips off here. Alright, got the grips off, and I loosened up the plate screws here. And so this screw right here is actually what's holding the cylinder in. And if you have some of the ones, the older ones, like the 5-screw model, where you'll see a screw up here, so 1, 2, 3, 4, and the 5th screw being right here in the trigger guard. That 5th screw is actually a screw that puts tension on the spring to operate and make sure that the cylinder stop hand right there is nice and snug. So by removing, before we get too ahead, we're going to remove this screw completely. This one's a little tight. Now, I keep track of what screws have gone where, and that's kind of one of the reasons why we're actually doing this for this revolver, a particular one, because this one has, since we've had it, we have not had it come apart, or we have not had it apart and everything. So I'm also not a fan of Loctiting these in or anything like that, because if you ever want to get in here, and as you can see, some of this little crud and stuff is built up in there. So anyway, once you remove that, you can actually remove the cylinder, and I usually use these flutes if you have them, and line up that flute like that to the frame, and that will remove it. Now by doing this here, you have access, and one beauty thing about Smiths is the crane will actually come off. I do like that feature. Colts, they're fixed in there, they're kind of all together, so you don't really have a way to take this off. The importance to me of taking this off is the ability to be able to take a brush like this and actually clean up in here, and where all the soot and stuff kind of gathers, which you'll not be able to get to while it's together, and also clean up this right here, because this, and then without proper oiling, you can definitely start to see the cylinder kind of tightening up and not really working as smooth as it should, like that. And then it gives you access to all of this a little easier. And so most of these are reverse thread. I don't take them apart. I don't take the cylinder rods out and everything like that. If you're trying to correct forward end shake or whatever, then it's necessary, but make sure you have all the proper stuff to do that. Brownells sells the proper tools. The way this is locked up into the frame is when it goes in there, into the hole right here, which you also notice on the screw, there's a little head on it, a little tip on it right here. And that is where it's locking in here. Does that number inside the frame, and that's what's keeping it in there. If you go too tight, you can bind these things up, so it's kind of a sweet spot between snug down and not causing this to bind when you're opening and closing the cylinder, so that's important. Also, when we're going to remove the rest of these screws, what I do is I keep them kind of in the order. You'll also notice that when I remove this one here, that the screw on this end right here under the grip has got a flat top head on it, and versus the other ones where they're rounded. So make sure you keep them separate. And I like to kind of keep, even though they look very similar, I like to keep the crane and the cylinder assembly screw as its own. Now this part here, there's a couple different ways to do it. You know, if you watch the American Gunsmithing Institute videos, or the man, the myth, and the legend, Bob Dunlap, when he takes the side plates off, he likes to just take a screwdriver and put it under there and pop it. I've done that, and then there people will say, "Oh, just don't do that" or whatnot, and I don't know. You can take with it a grain of salt for whoever you want to go with. I have over the time, even though he's not really a fan of it, I take like a plastic hammer, and I just gently kind of tap this frame. Now this one may be a little bit more stuck than some, but yeah, by just tapping, and this is just a rubber hammer, and you'll see the side plate come up. Now I don't know, you can choose how you want to do it. Of course, making that look a little probably more gross than it is, but you can. So once I get the side plate off, I put the screws onto the side plate in the order that they come out in, because that way you can remind yourself the way they go, and that way you also keep your parts together and you're not losing anything. Alright, so now inside here you've got all kinds of goodies, and oh boy, what's that? That's your in a sense, that's your safety bar that stops the hammer from overriding and going forward, and it kind of lives, the stirrup lives on the rebound slide like that and goes up. You can see the way it lives, and kind of lodges itself into the frame there and goes up and down right in through there. Okay, so take that out. Alright, the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to loosen up the mainspring here. You can see that. I've also been kind of infamous for, well, I don't know about infamous, I'm self-aggrandizing, and I have been known that what I do is, if I'm storing some of these for a long period of time, I actually loosen up the mainspring, and I just take the tension off of them. And of course, if you're doing that, you got to remember that you've done that. But that's usually the way I store them, if they're going to be kind of stored away for a long time. I don't know, call me crazy, but that's just what I do. And so once you do that, you can just slide this thing out, and that's the stirrup, or the flat spring right there that rides on that stirrup on the hammer. That's what I was trying to tell you. All right, so now you're going to take out the hammer, and what you do is, you can see here what's stopping it, or what kind of goes over there, is the cylinder release lockup system here. And you're wondering, how does that work? Well, how it works is, on the cylinder there's a kind of a tip right here on the middle of the cylinder, and what that does is that lives and goes right into the hole right here. And what that does is it pushes onto that. We don't really have anything to kind of show you, but it'll push right into the middle of that, causing it to pull back, right, like that. And then when you push this forward, that pushes that flush and allows you to take the cylinder out. When doing so, when you're messing with these things, make sure you have that thing fully pushed forward before you start forcing the cylinder out, because what you do if you don't have it completely and you're kind of like halfway like this and you're kind of lax, you know, not really completely forward, what you start doing is you start creating you're pretty much taking the pin and overriding really harshly into the frame, and you'll see some gouging starting to happen right here in the frame and the hole. That's another good indication when you're checking for these things. That's one of the things I check is this hole right here being gouged out quite a bit from somebody not understanding that you really got to have that thing fully forward before you pop the cylinder. And then, you know, of course, you can get into the other things like how is the crane fitting to the frame right here in this part. It should be a seamless, you know, you feel it like one piece going all the way through. There should not be a gap. If you start seeing something like that, then you can pretty much guess that frame or that crane has been bent, and that's usually caused by somebody sitting there and doing the old spin and slamming it shut, which is extremely terrible for a revolver. So, all right, now you'll see where this is connected to, which is this bar right here, and when you push that in, that happens, and you can see what happens is it gets out of the way of the hammer right there. So now that allows us to cock the hammer back and do that. So by holding the trigger down, now I can remove the hammer because it's now taking the tension off of that, and the hammer comes right out. The hammer there, you got this is the whole mechanism that creates a double action throw and everything. You can tell it's a vintage one because it's got the hammer mounted firing pin, which has definitely got some goo in it. All right, now here you have all this right here, and you can go forward, or you can go as much as taking this out and removing the cylinder lockup right there. But we're going to go ahead and get to this part right here, and this is where you need that tool. So what this tool does is it takes out the rebound slide and spring assembly, and this is also where a rag comes in handy because I have ran this thing right into my hand over the years of doing this. And you can also see the other reason, a good thing to do this every now and then, not often, but I don't know how well you'll see it, but there was some rust or something building up right there. Amazing. But notice how the inside of the frame is pretty clean. I've seen some where the insides of the frame was just, I mean, outside of the gun looked okay, but the inside, oh boy. The other thing too is I don't make a habit of taking these apart all the time because the studs that all this stuff has to live on, you don't want to be causing too much stress and strain on those unnecessarily, because once those snap off or loosen up, yeah, you've got to go to an actual real gunsmith that knows what they're doing to fix those. Alright, so here what I'm doing, get you a better look at it, is this is the rebound slide, and I'm taking this and I'm putting it right through here because now that this slot goes over the pin like this, and I'm going to have to cover this with the rag, but I'm depressing the spring and I'm pulling up. And what that did now is that took the rebound slide out, and there's this spring that lives in there, and every now and then you can see that there's some crud and goo that lives on there. And these are all areas too, if you want to lightly polish, that will help slick up the action, because this is all moving parts in there. Alright, so now that that's out, you can pull the hand back, and then you can actually take the trigger mechanism out right here. The whole assembly there, and there's the cylinder paw and everything, and the rotational hand and everything. It lives in there. It's just got a spring and stuff like that. I don't take these out unless I absolutely have to, but you know, there it is. You can see how it all kind of works in there. Smooth trigger face. Okay, the other thing to take out, you can, if you you know, right here is that cylinder stop right there. And so I'm gonna go ahead and switch And the way this kind of comes out is kind of interesting because you got to push it down because that top of it lives in the frame, and you kind of get it out of there, and then you'll be able to kind of lift it out. And it'll come out right there. A little spring that lives in there. Like I said, normally if you have an old 5 screw, there's a screw that that goes here through the trigger guard, and what that does is it puts pressure on the spring, and that's what kind of puts the tension on this, which is actually in a way a better design for taking them out if you're taking them out a lot. But this hand right here is what is locking up into the bottom of the cylinder into these lockups right here. That's what's doing it. It's right there. It leads in and locks up, and then when it drags on the top of there, you can see the wear is what's wearing and causing the turn line. There you go, and that's it. When you got a lot of slop cylinder side to side shake or whatever, you usually mean that you could replace this. You can get an OEM part, replace it. Replace the spring as well. I always say if you're going to go ahead and do that, replace the spring as well. You can get an oversized one, which means you're going to have to file and fit these up into the frame, the window right there. You're going to have to do that. Alright. Also, when removing this, make sure we got a proper screwdriver tip that fits it. And it does. This is the cylinder release latch, and it's pretty much just a key that lives on top of all that. And the screw is just a cap that holds that, and that'll just come right off. And you drop it on the ground, but there it is. That's it. Now, this other part here is be cautious, because you can lose these things, or some people don't even know they exist. We're going to push this back. I'm going to go ahead and grab a hold of the back part of this and pull it. And you can see now that comes out of the frame, and I'm going to carefully pull up on it this way. And what I mean by carefully is because this has a detent and a spring that lives in there. I don't know if it's going to want to come out of there, but there is a spring that lives in there. There it is. And like I said, some people don't even know this exists. We're going to have really hard to do this looking through the camera, but yeah, that's where it lives, and the tiniest little detent. You'll see one end is tapered. Get that dust off of it. You'll see one end is tapered. That's the end that goes in, like that. And that's and that is it. I mean, that's kind of the end of the frame. We're gonna go ahead and actually take this little brush and take a little bit of ballistol right here. And I'm going to go ahead and just kind of clean this up right here, because that's one of the things that clean that up. And if there's any other kind of crud or built up anything in there, go ahead and clean it up, especially around the sections that move a lot, which is all through here. Inside this slot right here. Alright. So also gives you an opportunity to clean through here and go all the way through. You can take like a Q-tip or whatnot where the cylinder leaves, because then that way you can get all the way through and make sure that channel is nice and cleaned out. Alright, so we're going to start putting this thing back together, which we're going to put the spring back in here like this. That's the way it goes. And try to do this without and some of these parts you could say, you know, probably not, I wouldn't take them apart unless you absolutely have to, because they can be kind of a difficult piece to put back in. And we're going to use this screwdriver, and very careful when you're doing something like this to not scratch anything. Let's get kind of an angle right there. So, like I said, you don't want to do these type of things all the time, because you are kind of putting stress on the parts and studs and things unnecessarily. You don't need to. So, alright, now that that's back in there, we're going to go ahead and put the trigger back in. Make sure this pin, the stud here, goes forward up on the top, and then we're going to go ahead and drop that, and this right here lives in the slot on top of that cylinder slot, inside the cylinder slot. Goes in like that. The hand is there forward. Make sure it's flush down in there, and then you can also see here that stud is right there, because that stud needs to live in the front face of the cylinder, there's rebound slide. Alright, now I'm going to drop some oil on this thing, just a little bit, especially on the springs and stuff. And I use Ballistol. You can use whatever you prefer. Put that back in there just like that. Okay, and then now I've got it lined up and ready to go. Now here's where that tool comes back into play. Again, remember I told you that your life will be a lot easier if you have this. If you don't, you might want to just wait till you get one, because you don't want to put any unnecessary strain on anything that you don't need to, because this is also very tricky. Alright, I'm going to cover it again because I don't want to slip off of this thing and end up stabbing my hand. Don't ask how I know that. So, there it is. Now it's flush back down there. Okay? Alright. You know what? We almost forgot to put this back in there, didn't we? I don't want to forget parts. Slide that back in there, because you get to the whole end and you forgot to put in that part that needs to go back in there, and then you got to undo everything. But that's the nice thing about a Smith, is because they're kind of laid out, versus Colts. They're kind of stacked on each other, and you really can't, you gotta, it's kind of like just a layer game, really. So once that's back in there, we're going to actually lock that down now, and get this reinstalled, clean out any debris inside of there. And I don't, for me, it doesn't, I don't mind getting a little oil on the threads and everything, because again, I'm not trying to seize anything down. And I check a lot of this stuff periodically if we're going to take it to the range or whatnot. And I'm using my thumb here as a brace just to make sure, and I snug it up. All right, that makes sure that kind of locks that into place right there. You could take a little bit of oil. Just slightly put some oil right in there. Go ahead and put the trigger, set it down the way it needs to. Right like that. Working the hammer, see that? Alright, and the strut right here, or the stirrup right there. That way I can put this hook back in there, and the hook, you'll see it faces, obviously you can see the curvature, the way it just kind of fits back into place. Alright, like that. We'll go ahead and screw the tension screw back in there for the mainspring. Okay, all back together. Now a other little tip too. If you get one that you're getting a lot of light strikes, double action pull, kind of a quick and dirty way you can fix that is you can back this screw out and put a shim on the top of the screw head right here. What that does is it kind of creates, you're basically getting more pressure on the spring. What works the best, honestly, is a spent primer right out of shell casing. That is the perfect shim. Again, that's a quick and dirty way to do it. The proper way to do it is to replace your leaf spring, and just all together is to replace that, so that you're back to a fresh start. Okay. Now, because I like to make sure that this is properly greased up, oiled up. Alright, go ahead and put this back together right here. Look at that. Spins free. Alright, I line up the crane with the flute again, and then that way close it right back up. We're going to put our safety bar, if you will, or right back in there. You can see the way it lives. A little stirrup. Make sure that stirrup goes on top of the rebound slide stud. Okay. I'll take my screws out of here and place them carefully in the order that they're going to go. Clean this up just a little bit. You can see these things like here, like the boss that lives there, that helps sturdy up, all the studs and everything, so they're not wallowing out on you and causing a really bad problem. Now you also see this tip right here, and that's got to live underneath the frame up here. So what I do is you just kind of start it and make sure that stirrup's all the way up so you don't run into problems there, and then that way I wedge it up there. Even though it's a non-marring hammer, I go ahead and put a little rag right there, give it a little tap, and that seats the whole side plate back on properly. Maybe a little bit one right here, just a little love tap right there. That should set that in place. Okay. Then again. And we're going to put the screws back in there. So back to the kind of what I said about this one here. And what I did was I snug it down, and then I back it just a small turn. And what I'm doing is now I'm checking, and I should have a nice easy thing. Because some of them, not all of them, but some of them you'll get where you'll snug them down, and then you'll feel that cylinder binding up a little bit. It won't open as easy as that. It'll kind of bind up, and you sit there wondering what's going on, and that will be what's going on. All right, now that it's all cleaned up, this also gives you a good chance to examine the frame out here. Make sure you got no rust and crazy stuff happening underneath the frame or underneath the grips and everything. So that's the other thing too. Like, you know, most of the shops, it's going to be kind of hard to say, well, let me take those grips off and examine the frame under there and all that. They're going to be like, no, you're not doing that. So, you know, just kind of small stuff you can do. Where I've seen, we bought some that where you take that frame off or the grips off, and that frame is all rusted out, and it's like, oh, well, what are you going to do? So there. You can see the way it lives. Put that right there. And also with stuff like, especially like this Lou Horton, the original grips, having the original grips on this thing is very important, because these finger grooved grips are very expensive. I think we've mentioned that many times when we showcase this thing, that how expensive those grips are. There we go. Beautiful. It operates smooth, and we're going to put a light drag right there and check. Timing is right on. That's right, timing's on. Let it down. A little bit of shake, but not bad at all. Not bad at all. 44 Magnum, not bad. Blued, but there you go. Thanks for watching.